For thousands of years, the Arabian Peninsula was considered the most inhospitable place on Earth. No rivers, no forests, almost no rain, just an ocean of sand so vast and so brutal that the great empires of the ancient world looked at it and decided it wasn't worth the trouble. The Persians didn't bother. The Romans drew a line at its borders. Even Alexander the Great, who conquered everything he touched, died before he could launch the invasion he was planning. They all made the same assumption, that nothing important could ever come from a place like that. They were all wrong. From that empty desert came a religion that now controls the lives of 2 billion people. From that same desert came a family so ruthless and so brilliant that they turned sand into the most strategically important piece of land on the planet. And today, that country is building a city so enormous and so strange that nothing like it has ever existed in human history. How did a land that nobody wanted become the country that everyone needs? How did a collection of warring desert tribes become the most powerful monarchy in the modern world? And why is Saudi Arabia right now making a bet that could either save the country or destroy everything it was built on? This is the story of the kingdom that was born from nothing, rose on the back of the world's most dangerous resource, and is now racing against time to survive without it. To understand how deep this story goes, we have to go back to the very beginning. Most people think of Saudi Arabia as an oil country, a modern creation, something that appeared in the 20th century and filled up with money. That is a massive mistake. Human beings have lived on the Arabian Peninsula for at least 300,000 years. Long before oil, long before Islam, long before any kingdom existed, the peninsula was a crossroads. Caravans moved through it carrying frankincense and myrrh from Yemen up to the Mediterranean. Traders carried silk and spices from India across its sands toward Egypt and Rome. The people who survived in this desert were not weak, they were the opposite. They developed a culture built entirely around two things: absolute loyalty to the tribe and absolute mastery of the land that was trying to kill them. The Bedouin code that emerged from those centuries in the desert was one of the most sophisticated social systems in the ancient world. Honor, hospitality, and vengeance were not suggestions. They were the laws that kept people alive when no government, no army, and no court of law existed to protect you. For thousands of years, the peninsula had no unified ruler. It didn't need one. The tribes were the government. Then, in the year 570, in a city called Mecca, a child was born who would change everything. Muhammad ibn Abdullah grew up in a society that had the wealth of trade routes, but none of the spiritual cohesion of the great empires around it. The Arabs prayed to hundreds of different gods. Tribes raided each other constantly. The poor had no protection. When Muhammad began preaching a new religion, one God, one community, radical equality, before that God, the established powers of Mecca tried to silence him. They failed. By the time he died in 632, the entire Arabian Peninsula was unified under Islam for the first time in its history. What happened next was one of the fastest military expansions in human history. Within 100 years of Muhammad's death, Arab armies had conquered Persia, Egypt, the Levant, North Africa, and half of Spain. An empire that stretched from the Atlantic Ocean to the borders of China, built in a single century, out of a desert that nobody had taken seriously. But here is the thing that most people miss. The center didn't hold. The caliphate fractured. Different dynasties rose and fell. The great Islamic empires shifted their capitals to Baghdad, to Cairo, to Istanbul. The Arabian Peninsula itself, the birthplace of all of this, slowly slid back into what it had always been: a land of tribes, a land of sand, a land that the world passed through but never stopped to rule. For nearly 1,000 years, the peninsula was a sideshow to everyone else's history. That was about to change, but not because of oil. Not yet. In the year 1744, in a small village called Diriyah in the heart of the Arabian desert, two men made an agreement that would eventually reshape the entire modern world. One was Muhammad ibn Saud, the leader of a minor tribal clan. The other was Muhammad ibn Abd al-Wahhab, a religious scholar who believed that Islam had drifted so far from its origins that it was barely recognizable. He preached a return to the pure, strict practices of the earliest Muslims: no shrines, no saint worship, no deviation from the literal text. Their agreement was simple and brutal in its elegance. Ibn Saud would provide the military power. Ibn Abd al-Wahhab would provide the religious legitimacy. Together, they would conquer the peninsula and purify it. This partnership between the House of Saud and the Wahhabi religious establishment is now over 250 years old. It is the oldest and most durable political alliance in the modern Arab world, and it is still, right now, now the foundation on which the entire Saudi state rests. The first Saudi state conquered most of the peninsula within decades. Then the Ottomans crushed it. A second Saudi state rose. The Ottomans crushed that one too. Then came the third attempt, and this time, no one would be able to stop it. In 1902, a 21-year-old named Abdulaziz ibn Saud rode out of exile in Kuwait with 40 men and recaptured the city of Riyadh in a night raid. It was the beginning of one of the most extraordinary personal conquests in modern history. Over the next 30 years, Ibn Saud fought, negotiated, married, and maneuvered his way across the entire peninsula. He unified tribes that had been at war for centuries. He defeated rivals who had British backing. He created a country almost entirely through the force of his own will. In 1932, he declared the founding of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. He named it after his own family. No other country on earth is named after a ruling family. It wasn't an accident. It was a statement. This is ours. It has always been ours, and it will always be ours. 6 years later, in 1938, an American oil company drilling in the eastern desert hit something that would change the course of world history. The scale of what they found is almost impossible to comprehend. Saudi Arabia sits on top of roughly 17% of all proven oil reserves on the planet. At its peak, it was pumping more oil than some entire continents. The wealth that poured into the kingdom transformed it faster than any country had ever been transformed before. In 1950, most Saudis were still nomadic Bedouin living in tents. By 1980, the country had highways, hospitals, universities, and air-conditioned shopping malls rising out of the same desert where camels had roamed a generation earlier. But the oil created a problem that no one wanted to talk about. A country that gets its wealth from the ground doesn't need its people to produce anything. It just needs them to be quiet. The Saudi government made an implicit deal with its population. We will give you free healthcare, free education, subsidized housing, and guaranteed government jobs. In return, you will not ask questions about who runs this country or how they run it. For decades, the deal held. Then the price of oil started falling. Then a generation of young Saudis arrived who had seen the internet, traveled abroad, and come home with questions that the old deal couldn't answer. In 2017, a 31-year-old prince named Mohammed bin Salman, known as MBS, consolidated power faster than anyone had seen in Saudi history. Within months, he had arrested hundreds of princes, businessmen, and officials in a purge disguised as an anti-corruption campaign. He held them in the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Riyadh until they signed over their assets or their loyalty. Some did both. He was either modernizing the country or taking it over, possibly both at the same time. Under MBS, women were allowed to drive for the first time. Cinemas opened. Music concerts were held in public. The religious police lost their power to arrest people on the street. At the same time, a journalist named Jamal Khashoggi walked into the Saudi consulate in Istanbul and never came out. American intelligence agencies concluded that MBS had ordered his killing. The world condemned it. And then 6 months later, went back to buying Saudi oil. Because that is the position Saudi Arabia has always occupied. Too important to punish, too dangerous to ignore, too rich to isolate. But right now, Saudi Arabia is making the most dangerous bet in its history. MBS knows that oil will not last forever. He knows that the world is slowly moving away from the fuel that built his country. And so, he has launched the most ambitious economic transformation plan any country has ever attempted. He is building a city called NEOM in the desert, a straight line of buildings, 170 kilometers long, half a mile wide, and 300 meters tall. No cars, no streets. Powered entirely by renewable energy. A city designed to exist in a world after oil. He is spending hundreds of billions of dollars buying football clubs, golf tournaments, tech companies, and Hollywood studios. Not because he loves sport or cinema, because he is trying to transform Saudi Arabia's image from oil state to cultural powerhouse before the oil runs out. Whether it works is the question that will define the next 50 years of the Middle East. Saudi Arabia was built in the desert by men who refused to accept that nothing could grow there. It was unified by one man's will. It was made rich by a resource it didn't create and can't replenish. And now it is being reinvented at extraordinary speed by a prince who is either a visionary or a gambler. The desert has seen empires come and go for 3,000 years. It outlasted all of them. The question now is whether the kingdom built on top of it can outlast itself. If you found this interesting, there's a lot more where that came from. The complete histories of the countries that shaped our world, told in the time it takes to finish a coffee. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one.